Oh my god! The first thing I heard was Chog Bucks. I love it.
Yeah, you're in the right place. Okay.
What a plug!
Great,
Get your
great.
Chog Bucks, people. How you guys doing?
Yeah,
How you
always on
doing?
sale. I'm great. I'm
We got
great.
your wish, Kevin. We're on Discord. What do you think?
I know. I'm loving it. It sounds so good. What do you think, Chad? Does it sound good? Holy cow! What a dream. Oh, and we got the
Hear the
audience
pogs
thing
from here.
too. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I love it. Well, let me plug the link again in my channel. People that want to hang out. Thanks again
Yeah,
for
if
doing that in my
anybody-
Discord, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, if anybody wants to join the Discord and join the live cast in the stage, the new fancy stage channel, you can ask a question later on in the second half of the show or join the conversation.
Pretty sweet.
Are we ready to kick this one off?
Oh my
Yeah,
God,
let's
everyone
go.
Sounds amazing.
Let's go. I
Let's
know
do
we're
it.
all here for real. No more phone on the table. Okay, so this is Theorycraft episode 8. Previously on Clubhouse, now here, probably for good. Discord, where gamers play. We wanted to talk about influencers this week and their effect on gaming culture. And Chris, so you were saying you wanted to kind of roll with the original format for this one. Give us a little time to simmer on news and topical things before we hop into the meat
The
of the
big
episode.
topic. Yeah. I think it's cool just to chat like kind of what games we're playing or things like that, and then move into talk a little about like maybe some big news happening in the industry, and then go into the big topic. Yeah, I think that's a good format.
What y'all been playing lately?
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing. I tweeted about this. I've been playing Apex Legends' new arena feature. They just released this, I think, last week or so, and they've seen a huge surge of players again, resurgence of players, which has been really good for them. And the feature, I thought, I mean, there's arena features essentially in every shooter game, right? Valorant or CS:GO, etc. And I thought this one was interesting a little bit though, because the way that they do the round structure is it's with like tennis. So you have to get like you have to have a 2-round advantage over the opposing team to win. And so you can keep having. We had one game where we would win, then they would win, then we would win, and they would win, and there was like 8 rounds or something. And I thought that was crazy, and it was just we couldn't figure out immediately like how it would work, right? Usually it's like the best of 3 or best of 5 or something. But yeah, I've been having a good time. I think there's a lot of heroes in the game that aren't really conducive with this format. Like there's one hero, Crypto, who sends out like a drone to kind of survey the area, which is really good in the battle royale, but not so great in an arena. So it'll be interesting to see what they do if they release heroes that have an edge in arena, or how the balance goes. Arenas, historically are always like really hard to balance for, because there's just a lot of pressure for the balance, right? I always remember hearing, for example, Kaplan having regrets of doing arena and WoW, just because it's so much pressure on the designers to have a razor balance for everything, which kind of can be a distraction for the broader game.
Yeah,
so
it's
it'll be interesting.
on the rest of the game.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see what they do.
What problem do you think they were trying to solve with that you got to win by 2 structure? Like, I haven't played Apex in a while, but do you think they were just experimenting?
I just think they're just trying to figure out a way that's fair. That doesn't feel like you just. They mentioned they did a best of 7 originally as the mode earlier, but then the problem was if you got steamrolled, right, it just felt like you're just sitting in match over match losing until you lost enough, right? And so they tried to keep tuning it for a good experience, which is admirable. But I think it's a little unintuitive of how it works. So we'll see what they do.
Kevin, you were saying before?
Oh, yeah. So I've just been playing mostly WoW this last week. I've been leveling a character for TBC still. It's been slow going. But yeah, that's been fun. I've been playing a little bit of NieR Automata, which has been...
you have?
Yeah. And I've never played it before. So I just started this past like week and a half or so. And I usually play towards the end of my stream sometimes. So that's been interesting.
I started jamming on that like a week or so ago. I was in Discord with Chris, actually. I just picked it up, I think, on sale over Christmas, and I decided, let me give it a go. Everyone's always talking about it. And fuck, did I talk about this last week? I hope not. But, like the first 45 minutes, there's just no save points. And
right.
I didn't really realize that until I died shortly in, and then died at what I figure is the last boss of that. And I just don't know if I want to do it again. I don't know if I'm at a point where I feel like I need to push through that challenge for myself. Like I might just kind of move on. casual asshole me that I am now. But
right.
Gotta get
Yeah,
good.
I did that on stream.
I know, I
did the
have to
start
get
on
good,
stream, and I lost 4 times before I finally did it on the 5th time. I got one shot by the boss several times, and it sends you all the way back, and it's like a 45-minute experience. And people call it the tutorial, funnily enough, like. But yeah, it is weird. Like, I like that it's trying, like, if the game were more difficult all the way through, like a Dark Souls type of thing that they're trying to do, it would set the tone really well, I think. But the problem is the game isn't that difficult for the rest of the experience, at least to the point where I'm at. So it seems a really strange thing that the opening part is so unforgiving, and then it's super forgiving after that. But yeah, once you get past basically the demo, like this is what they released a long time ago, was the demo, was that first part. Once you get through it, you can save a lot more frequently, and it's not nearly as difficult.
I bet. It's just weird that messaging is up front like that. Like, I think signaling the sort of game that your game is the wrong way early on is a real big... I mean, so at Clay we have Oxygen Not Included, which I was working on for a while. And it's a sim game, it's a colony survival type game. But it's like, the word survival makes it seem like it's going to be super penalizing. Like, it's not a roguelike, right? You are sort of expected to fail. But for some reason, all the connotations of sim and survival and just like how gray and barren it is, and the fact that your colonists are named duplicants, which to me meant, they must be disposable. So they're like sort of supposed to die, right? Because they're just meat sacks. And so when I first started playing it or working on it, it was like, when something would go wrong, I was like, I'm supposed to just like, everything's supposed to go wrong. I'm supposed to die and kind of start again. But the truth is you can really roll with a lot of the more minor problems. But because I had it in my head that this was supposed to be a Dark Souls kind of experience, it threw me off. Like, and it's tough when you have that dissonance between the art style of these cute things, and yet the game's really hard. But then when I think the game's really hard, I want to re-roll, but you're not supposed to re-roll because then you don't learn. And
2 games have done this messaging really well that come to mind. Darkest Dungeon has that little blurb at the very beginning that says, this game is going to chew up your dudes. Don't worry about it. It's part of the experience. So it sets a nice tone because that is how it goes. And then the other one was Project Zomboid. And it starts with like the simple words of, this is the story of how you died, creating this expectation, of course, that, you're going to die at some point. It's just a matter of time. So I like both of those intros. But yeah, you're right in that if it sets the wrong message, which I feel like NieR did, it's very weird.
Well, good luck with the rest. Candace, did you have anything you've been playing around with lately?
Yeah, speaking of meat sacks, I just
We
finished...
always are, yeah.
Remember, I'm keeping that tally. Speaking of meat sacks, I just finished NieR Replicant. And so I was actually I downloaded Destiny 2 because Season 2 just went live. And my body is ready to let Destiny win me back over
Nice.
with their returning player experience, because I vaguely, because I played a lot Destiny 1, and I vaguely recall getting to max level just for the story, and mostly because I'm a Nathan Fillion fangirl. But I don't remember where I left off. I don't remember what my light level was. I don't even remember if I'm playing a ranger or hunter or whatever it was. So I'm just ready for that game to welcome me back and win me over.
A little fist bump there because I'm also a Nathan Fillion fangirl.
Oh yeah.
Aren't
is
we
he
all?
still around though? I don't know. I thought, wasn't there that whole trailer where his character died in the trailer or something?
Whoa.
Spoilers.
Oh.
There's a trailer. It's on
Spoilers.
YouTube. Okay. I worked on that game. I should know this like authoritatively, and I don't, because it was a later DLC, so it's fine.
Also, the kid in Sixth Sense, he sees dead people. So,
Shit, dude. Come on. Next, you're going to tell me like someone dies in Final Fantasy VII or something. It's fucked up.
Jesus.
Well, I mean, I just majorly spoiled NieR Replicant by saying, speaking of meat sacks, so...
Meat sacks ahoy.
Spoilercraft. This is what this channel is now.
Chris, did you have any news?
Yeah. So, I mean, I made some notes of things happening this week. Kevin, I noticed you commented, I think, on some tweet about this, about the Ubisoft thing, wherever it was trending on Twitter, about how they said that only 26% of their revenue comes from premium games now, and the rest are service-based games. And so this is kind of, I guess, another more evidence to the whole games as service being the future and all these things, and premium games are. I think the clickbait here is always like premium games are over, but
Right.
I mean, Cyberpunk and God of War and all these games. I don't think premium's going anywhere, but I think it more speaks to just there's just more ways to monetize games these days than there was 20 years ago.
But I think it will impress upon people that are figuring out how to be the most profitable on how to structure their monetization. So that's the fear, is that they move more towards the nickel and dime approach.
By premium games, you mean like a AAA single player one and done, buy the title, finish the game?
Yeah, just kind of a box product. Usually is just like $60 or whatever it is. Even Valheim's considered a premium game. It's like it was what $20-$30. It's just kind of the one and done. You make the game, you sell the box, and it's over, sort of thing. We already talked about Apex adding the arena mode, and now they have over 1 billion lifetime revenue for that game, which is really impressive. They also just released on mobile. The game was built by, I think, Tencent built the game. EA had to deal with Tencent to help them build the game, because Tencent has legions of developers just waiting around, like, tell us what you want us to build. And then I think the last piece of news, I suppose, unless like Candace or Luca, you guys have anything else, but I mean, the other one kind of bleeds into our main topic, which was, I guess there was a lot of drama over, you mentioned you've been playing the BC beta, Kevin, but I suppose there was some drama about us. I haven't looked into it admittedly too deeply, but there was some drama around there's like a window of time where you can level up, and then after that you can boost. Is that the story, Kevin?
Well, people are complaining about how long the pre-patch is lasting for TBC.
I see.
They're also upset about the boost, and they're also upset about the like special edition, which provides you with mounts and things like that sort of break the format. They're not just cosmetic, they're like level 40 100% speed mounts. So the epic mounts at level 40, so which has an impact on things like the Twink game and stuff like that. So people are typical outrage, right, of what they see is like, and it's also like $70,
Oh wow.
And so the price point is aggressive, and there's been a lot of outrage.
Isn't that how horror movies start? Like, you introduce something into an environment that had never meant for it, or like at least a really funny, like Back to the Future style movie where like you go back in time, but you give someone the winning lottery number or a max level boost or something.
And you go back into the future and it's apocalypse because of it. Right?
And then like millions of children aren't born because these people boosted instead of meeting each other,
That's right. Oh, my chat's telling me that it's not 100% until 60. So some are saying it's scaling or something like that. I don't know exactly, but
I would be shocked if they let that through in that form. It'd be pretty freaking bad. I feel like a lot of the messaging around the BC premium packages they offer coming out, it really confused me. Like, after I spent more time reading about it, I was kind of less outraged. I mean, I'm probably not going to end up playing it either way, but like the way they announced it to me just made it seem like you're going to have to pay to go forward into it, when really they were announcing a bunch of things like you could pay for, but that you're going to go forward into it, as just the basic experience. Like, that's going to happen. It felt like, I don't know, they maybe should have led with sort of like, here's a bunch of extra stuff, but don't worry, you're automatically going into BC and the adventure continues instead.
Right.
Like, they didn't say that. I was just like, here's
$140, It's a choice, but if you want both choices, you have to pay. So you can do either or. Yeah, there's a lot of confusion and speculation. And of course, the memes hit immediately, which cast more confusion on what's actually happening. But
because I always wondered what they were going to do about the transfer over from Classic to BC. Like, were they going to keep them self-contained? Were they going to let people transfer the character and clone it? Where did they land?
Is still a big question. Basically, it's as I was saying, it's a choice. Like, for each character, you make a choice. You decide whether or not he's going to go forward in TBC or stay in Classic. If you want to also do the other thing that you didn't choose, then you pay $35 and you make a clone of your character, and you get to do the other thing as well. But I still have questions on like what are the limits on the cloning? Does it have to happen in a certain amount of time? Can I go farm a bunch of Nax gear and then cloned to TBC? Can I what happens if I get to 61 in TBC and want to clone my character back to Classic? It raises a lot of questions that I don't have answers to.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the Classic experience going forward, I thought I saw the word fresh with them talking about fresh Classic realms, but they're not going to rerun the cycle again. I mean, if you're cloning a level 60 character, the idea is you're just going into a 1.12 patch where everything's already open. You're sitting at 60. It's just like, do you know what the Classic server looks like that you get cloned onto? What's been done?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
You don't know.
I looked kind of. There was some other news too. I think it was this week where the Blizzard did its earnings report, and what was interesting is just that they did have a lot of churn with subscribers and MAUs and player numbers, but the revenue was still pretty stable or higher.
Yeah, it had gone up. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
which is really
you
important.
can, which you could really deduce that too is really there's this concept in game development which is called the average ARPU, which is the average revenue per user.
Right.
And that is a really important number to have because, how much money do they make from a WoW subscriber over a year? Usually, traditionally, historically, it was over just really the subscription. But today, it's more complicated. There's more mounts, there's more other little added services. This is part of that, right? This whole thing with BC. And so they want to leverage the excitement of BC coming out with more kind of added services or mounts or whatever it is that you could buy, right?
And the hope was for the Classic community, I think, anyway, was that the game would have enough support that it would, like, enough people would show up that the game would then get support in some sort of Classic Plus type of idea. Or they put a real team or half a team on it to now support this community that's large and invested, and they want more stuff, right? But what happened instead was that, or what it appears to be, is that now this group is large, and so they're being seen as something to be monetized rather than supported with content. So that's the other big part of the disappointment is that this kind of money-based stuff is creeping into the experience rather than the love and care of what the original idea was.
I mean, it's complicated too because it's just like I'm all for if they want to add little premium things or collector's editions or mounts or whatever, if they don't ruin kind of the intended experience, right? And then it's also complicated because this was an experience crafted by developers years and years ago.
Yeah,
that you want to kind of honor, right?
Right.
And so that also complicates it. But
yeah, it's like the frame I always try to put this in is you're an up and coming writer who does comic books, and they hand you a mini series with Batman in it, right? And it's like you don't get to just throw guns in his hand and start blasting away. Like you're entitled to do your own thing, but you also have to respect where the character comes from and all the work everyone else has done to that point. So you have to pay reverence to that at the same time. So it's a really fine line, trying to figure out how much is, new and novel and fun, and how much of it is just exploitive and, someone trying to be that first person to do a thing.
What if Batman's gun shoots money, though? That's pretty canon.
Oh, sick, yeah.
Yeah, also, Ben Affleck's Batman with guns in the Snyder Cut is fucking awesome. So, it can work out, too.
Yeah, I have to agree to disagree on that one, but yeah.
Okay.
And so really this kind of brings us to our main topic, which has to do with influencers and the relationship with games, because another big thing this week has just been sort of, I don't know, just increased animosity or discontent with the state of the game. I mean, I feel like this happens every expansion cycle. At some point, everyone gets angry about something, but I think it's a little
run out of content.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think a lot of it has recently just been critique on just different system design or choices. Asmongold had his whole rant about the BC topic that we were just talking about. And so, yeah, I thought it would be a good thing to talk about just because in the past we have talked about, player relations with games, which has to do a little bit about influencers, but influencers definitely have played really an important role for the image of a studio or what the developers do on a project. Kevin, Blizzard's always had this value, which they call the donut theory, where at the center of the donut is kind of the enthusiast player that you kind of want to keep in mind when you're building out the game. You're not necessarily building up for the hardcore, but you want to make sure that it's a game that resonates with them, because if it doesn't, then the broader market won't be attracted to it, because really the influencer is the one who tells everybody else, like, hey, this game's cool.
Yeah. I just talked about this yesterday on my stream.
Got it.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
And that's really kind of the idea of the influencer too, is really, they're the ones who, I was funny because I was talking with some influencers today, and they were telling me they really hate the word influencer, and I hate it too. But
somebody called me that in chat today, and I threw up in my mouth a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to talk about here too, because even as a developer, a lot of times the influencers sort of videos or opinions and stuff can be sort of, I guess, weaponized with internally. Like, people will say, hey, look at what this guy's saying, we should change this, or people use it to defend their designs or whatever. And that's also really interesting. I mean, you got to see working on World of Warcraft in a big game, Kevin, before this thing really was a thing, right? And I mean, I did too for a little bit. So kind of maybe we could open with your thoughts here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I talk about like big streamers and YouTubers and the value I would have seen way back in the day. I still believe I would have killed for the ability to watch people so readily jump into the game and react to all the things that you were, had worked on, and just to see how they're reacting. And obviously the big thing for game developers is game designers is you have to translate, right? You have to translate everything you're seeing into usable information. It's not just, oh, he hates that, remove it, or he loves that, do more of that. It's a much more complex process. And so, but I still would have, it's like a focus group, but at various levels, and there would just be so much information you could pull from that. You could see how people react immediately to things, and also how their community reacts to their reactions, right? Like, because a lot of times there are times where, Asmongold's chat disagrees with him, and that kind of thing. So that's also really relevant and important. But I would have seen so much value in that, talking, routinely to the influencers. Like, I still feel like a better approach is that community manager layer. And we talked about this on a previous, Theorycraft chat, because at the end of the day, you kind of want game developers developing the game and community managers managing the community and, leveraging their strengths. It's very few people that can do both jobs exceptionally well, to communicate with big, important people. But I don't think the way that, for example, Blizzard is doing it is really effective or satisfying for either side of the exchange. And when I think about, like, when you go to sit down and talk to somebody, like, in order to get satisfaction, you both sort of have to be reasonable people, open-minded, and there has to be a sharing of ideas that's kind of open-ended. But a lot of times those chats are just, everyone's already made up their mind. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we already feel about it. And so it's just kind of this exchange of, did they do what we want? Or are they doing the thing we want? No, they're not. We're pissed. They're stubborn, right? And so both parties just kind of leave unsatisfied. And so I worry about, that's the format that's been used, and it's I don't think it's going to yield very good results. And maybe the better approach is just back to that sort of, the blue post info dump of, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're doing it, and you guys can react however you are. And then having more community manager discussions, to, like, maybe just listen to people's complaints with that sort of promise of your feedback will be passed along. I'm not sure, but that's the way it used to work. And it definitely freed me up to just make the game the best I could and not have to worry about, everyone loving it or hating it. So
you touched on something really interesting about community managers and influencers, because I feel like community managers have training on messaging and empathy, and they're representing the company, and so they have to be, very, like, positive and constructive, and really try to, like, take all of that constructive feedback out of something that someone that might just say, the game sucks, I hate it. And they have to have that empathy and say, well, tell me more about it. Tell me about what you don't like.
They have skills at placating as well, right? Like,
certainly.
And that's required sometimes when someone's just throwing a tantrum.
And I feel like influencers have no such restraint
Hmm.
or constraint rather on their interactions with their communities. Their communities are already bought in on who they are. And so it's really interesting. It feels like delegation of community management to influencers. But the part that's wild to me, and forgive my ignorance here, but my interaction with influencers or not community managers, but like popular streamers or community influencers is always like, I will get a rush of angry DMs on Twitter when they don't get an invite to an alpha or a beta. And it will be a sob story. It'll be, so and so got an invite and I didn't. And what are you going to do about it? I have more viewers. And sometimes they'll even say, like, this is so bullshit unfair because this is my livelihood you're taking away from me. If I'm not the first person streaming, then there's like this whole world of shit that I was never exposed to until I had a Twitter presence in 2016. And it's heartbreaking. And what also is wild about it is that, so there's this whole thing going on under the hood that sometimes the developers are either sheltered from or ignorant to. But then there's also this weird, so when you think about it, it's like, well, they're going to give beta and alpha access to people that would probably speak favorably of the game. Does that ever happen where they give it to people that are just roasting the game the whole time? And so like,
no, and they use that as a means to keep people in line, right?
That's what I mean. It feels like the influencers then have to pay homage back to the title so that they continue to get those beta invites, which is not necessarily the worst thing in the world because it does cause people to, I guess, think of things from at least another perspective. But it just, the whole thing is kind of weird and creepy to me. And I wonder what it feels like to an influencer, or what is your opinion of all of that, Kevin, as someone who's closer to all of this than I am?
Yeah, it's definitely a very competitive scene. Like, I don't engage in much of it, but I always get this feeling that under the hood, there's tons of competitiveness going on between streamers. In a lot of ways, it is a popularity contest, so it gets vicious, right? Like, we've all been to high school, so. And some of the same things go on. But yeah, on the flip side, I do feel like, let's just take Asmongold, for example, who he has two channels. He's got his Asmongold and then he's got his Zach, RAR channel. His Asmongold channel has far more persona in it than his Zach channel, where he's just more himself. I think the worry for a lot of people is that they're going to interact with the Asmongold, who has tons of persona. But in reality, I think if developers actually sat down with Asmongold, he would be far more reasonable, because if you watch the Zach side, it's like he is very intelligent, he's very thoughtful, and I don't think he would take the opportunity to be crude and rude and tell developers to their face that they have a dog shit ass game or whatever, like, I think it would be more productive than people expect. So,
okay, so maybe this is a little too zoomed out, but what I'm wondering is like the relationship between influencers and game developers, the effect influencers, the existence of them have had on game developers. Like, do we think they're a net good, or do we think they're a net bad? Like, I feel like I'm almost prepared to say that it has been a net negative on game development. And that's not because I don't love all these influencers, because I do, but I think there's that foundational tension there, because all the pros are somebody like you can just tune in and watch a player playing your game anytime you want. You couldn't do that 20 years ago. You had to fly people in to focus test in the studio. And it's expensive and awful. But the problem is that everybody who's doing this now is caught up in this like ecosystem of trying to kind of hustle and make a living. So you have all the weird power dynamics in play of like, well, if I want to get beta invites, I have to play by the rules. You have, if I want to get people to look at my channel. I'm not saying that like, these characters purposely fish for outrage. Like, I don't think that they do, and I would watch them kind of no matter what. But at the same time, that's what these platforms need. Like, that's why everybody's thumbnail is insane reaction faces and shit, because it gets traction. And so I think that like, even if the feedback is really good, and you can question whether the feedback is really good sometimes because of how much of it is achieved by sort of this self-reinforcing consensus versus just like somebody's gut impulse. Like, after I've made the same rant 18 times, it's probably sucked like quite a bit of other stuff into it, and I don't remember where it started. I think that you're just not going to really get like a very helpful representation of what's going on as a developer, because
absolutely,
you've got instant feedback, and the lag time on putting a meaningful change in sometimes is going to be a while, especially on a battleship like WoW. So if you focus grouped it and there was no expectation that like this was going to get turned around immediately, might be able to be chill. But in the meantime, the influencer thing is still burning the whole while. And so I just feel like those cycles are a little bit too fast for what a lot of game dev is. I guess I want to amend what I said. I think maybe influencers are net bad for AAA game development because you can have an instant reaction and you're never going to have like a really instant response unless it's like racism, Hong Kong, like something else going crazy, you know? And so you're going to have this community that's just kind of left hanging the whole time. In the indie space, it probably works a lot better because they can just fix shit at 1 a.m. when they want to and they don't have to run it by anybody, you know?
Well, I think the indie take that you're talking about is interesting because, think about it. Why does indies usually have better time with the influencers? I think a lot of it is because most smaller teams are really kind of structured to where most of the development, they don't have CMs, they don't have all these departments there. They don't have like these media training. It's all shoot from the hip sort of thing. And most of the developers are very frontline focused where they're talking with players already. They all just chat with players on Twitter. It's so like casual,
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what players ultimately want is they want like an authentic sort of casual conversation with the developers. They don't want to hear like this packaged marketing from a CM. Not to say that all CMs are just sort of, not authentic, but I think it's more rare to have a CM come off or kind of have the same sort of conversation with the player that a dev has,
Yeah. A lot of this is scale too.
Mm-hmm.
Like the size of the communities are almost always better in small sizes, right? And that it's more intimate. You can talk with the devs, the people are more reasonable. They're just excited to be part of this community and, they're more respectful. And then the community size grows and the voices get disproportionately loud. You start to see the extremes, the people that are massively pro and massively against, the game. And those are the voices you start hearing because that's what gets the hits, right? And then everything gets much more difficult. And also, again, the interaction between the developer gets the most use from that reasonable group that's in the middle of the two extremes, but they lose the ability to interact with that group. And this goes back to the influencer side. The influencer side is typically, collecting communities that are pro or anti and extreme one way or the other. And what the developers really need are people that are in the middle that are more reasonable to talk these things through. But they have trouble accessing that group and that voice sort of drifts away. So yeah, and a lot of that's just scale. So I think the indie guys, they benefit from that small scale quite a bit and it can be really constructive and useful. And then you kind of get past a tipping point where it becomes more formalized and they roll out the community managers and the pre-canned responses and the community at the same time is getting more extreme in its viewpoints.
I'm still trying to unpack what Luca said about it's inherently it's a net negative because of the instant reaction. And does that go hand in hand with the scale problem where like there are many instant reactions and it's maybe hard to sort or I was trying to understand why that was inherently bad.
The instant reaction is usually emotional, right? The first thing you do is react emotionally when you hear something, and then you calm down and you start thinking about it rationally, unless you've moved on to the next thing that you're reacting to emotionally, right? So today's day and age, everything is just bam, bam, bam. You always have access to some new thing, to some new drama or whatever. And so a lot of people get stuck sort of going from emotional response to emotional response, and they spend very little time after that emotional response stage to think of things through, to employ empathy and, more rational thought and things like that. So, that instant reaction sort of culture can be a net negative.
That's not even really what I was saying, but it is also true. So thanks for filling that in.
Well, so what did you mean though then?
Well, I guess what I'm thinking, I'm just trying to say that there's like a platform level, I think, problem here, which is that the influencer's goal is going to be to stay alive and thrive on their platform. And this is like the same, it's like the same problem that, takes root on Facebook and Twitter. And like, if I mentioned radicalization here, I just want to make it clear that I don't think that, like game streamers are like driving people into QAnon or whatever. But what I mean is the nature of the platform is you need to get the views, you need to get the subs, you need to be creating content. And so I think you're going to find what's sort of working and you're going to kind of lean into it. And it's really only when you get a lot of heft to throw around, when you're like, you know, at say Asmongold's level, that I think that you can really break out and start to have these quiet, authentic, you know, iconoclastic moments, because you're not, you don't need to really be in the graces of Blizzard or anything like that, because you're fucking number 41 on Twitch. You know, for every hour Asmongold streams, I did the math on this earlier because I was just curious. He generates like 37,000 hours of watch time in the last 30 days, which is like, amazing, so it's like irresistible for companies to want to tap influencers like this, because if you're an indie developer and somebody like that picks your game up, like what a force multiplier, especially if you didn't have to pay them for it. So like they're not going away. It's a force to really be reckoned with. I just mean,
is it good for game development or bad? Yeah.
Yeah, I think focus groups honestly worked pretty well, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Like if you have a measured space for the developer to watch people playing and let them form their opinions, that's cool. But if everybody starts getting so loud and tweeting at Blizzard customer support and shareholders catch wind of it and shit so fast, then there's this temptation to put the fire out immediately, and you may not even have time for a more thoughtful response. And I think that could maybe hamstring development if that's the kind of loop that you get into. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that it takes, again, there's that translation element, like trying to translate what they're saying and how they're feeling and how they're acting and how they're playing into usable information. And that gets harder and harder as they throw more persona and more extreme viewpoints into it, you know? Like and then at some point, I think the information just stops being useful altogether. You know, if they're just constantly saying this game sucks, I hate it, right? That's not usable anymore. But so the job definitely gets more difficult as a developer.
I will also say, though, that yes, what you said is 100% true. There's a lot of nuance there, especially if you befriend anybody in the community and then suddenly now they're accessible, or the developers are now accessible to them because of their friendship through you, and there's all sorts of weird stuff there. But I have to say, though, zooming in a little bit, as an individual contributor developer, I have to say that influencer culture was revolutionary to me and the way that I did my job. And it's less influencer culture as it is like just the emergence of Twitch and of YouTube and communities that form around. Like I would say that the first influencer, I guess, that changed my career was Wowhead. You know, like they had that presence and they had their guides, and for two reasons. One is when you work on a game like World of Warcraft, suddenly your entire resume is on YouTube. And if you need like to put a portfolio out, it's like not only will you find an in-depth analysis of your raid boss or your quest line as a YouTube video, but you'll find someone who tells the audience that it's the most brilliant fight that they've ever been part of, right? So there's like that part that was really, really cool. But then also, like, let me zoom out and tell you a story about Nipples. So I once had a raid boss that the model of the raid boss, he's like a chest up kind of guy. His name was Chromog. And he like fights you by like pounding his fist. Like you're the size of maybe like a cockroach and he's looming over you and you only see him from the chest up. And he didn't have nipples apparently. And it's not something I had considered about the model. I didn't consider him a mammal or requiring nipples. I didn't think about like the anatomy or the physiology of what, you know, that beast was in the game. But the problem is they didn't have nipples. And the entire feedback thread on the forums was, where are the nipples? It dominated the entire conversation. I could get no useful feedback out of the official post forum thread because he didn't have nipples.
Right.
And there's like only two things in the world now that I learned that can derail an entire feedback thread is like, one, the absence or presence of nipples on a boss. Because then they started talking about what does have a nipple. Like a dreadlord has nipples. Why do dreadlords have nipples?
I have a lot of follow-up questions, actually. But
you're welcome. And then also, or like if the hitbox is wrong. If you fuck up the hitbox on a boss, that's the only feedback you're going to get on the whole thing. And so like 8 times before it goes live, you make sure that the hitbox. Anyway, so my point is not just that I wanted to talk about nipples for a long time. It was that like suddenly I have access to the stream of consciousness thoughts of anybody who is playing the game on Twitch, right? So whereas like if I was as someone who made raid bosses, if I wanted to hear what people were thinking, or if they, as they were trying to figure out a mechanic of my boss, like one, I'd have to rely on them saying it in /say. I didn't have access to their like Ventrilo back in the day or their TeamSpeak or whatever. But like now I can just tune in and I can hear people say, does it do this? Does it do that? And I can hear like all the wild postulations they have of like what the boss does. So anyways, long story short, I thought it was great because suddenly I had this lifeline to the player that I didn't have before, should I choose to opt into it.
Yeah, that's what I would have found amazing as well. Yeah.
And I know like a lot of developers who have moved from service games to like say incubation teams, or they move to like closed development teams that they don't have a lot of players seeing the stuff they make day to day. And it's like you become like a Borg who leaves the collective. It's like you just don't have this resource anymore where you're hearing the players give you feedback constantly, and you get used to having that. Working on a live service game, it's awesome too, because you get to hear like instant feedback of something you create. You get like reinforcement of it. If they're happy with it, it feels really great. And it's like why you want to make games. It's why you're a game dev, is to do those sort of things. So
yeah.
I also wanted to say, if anyone wants to come up to give their take on the topic, which is the topic is influencers and their effect on games, go ahead and raise your hand in Discord. It's at the bottom to raise your hand, and then we can bring you up.
So
big question
go ahead.
to follow up is the harpies. They have boobs, but they lay eggs. So are they just for show, Candace, or do you have any knowledge of this? It's something that my stream has been obsessed with recently.
Stupid, sexy harpies. Yeah.
There was long ago. There was a bug. Did we ever tell the fantasy game Fantasy Ice joke? It's not even a joke, but like there was an iceberg that was like thicker on top than on bottom, and someone bugged it like that's not how icebergs work. Like icebergs should be like whatever. And someone nabbed the bug, meaning saying it was not a bug, like, and then declared that it's a fantasy game and there's fantasy ice, and ice can work however we want it to. So my answer there is that if we want them to, they can both hatch and then breastfeed their chicks.
All right,
and we have 100% ownership over that.
There we go. See, we're trying to apply logic and biology to a fantasy world.
I say we. I no longer work for Blizzard. Don't represent Blizzard in any way, shape, or form.
Glavesan, what's
game
up,
developers.
man?
Yes, hello. Okay, so I joined in that, and I just had to keep quiet that whole time.
No problem.
I was completely enthralled, but I'm okay. So so I have to say, what would you say the positive aspect of influencers having an impact on a gaming community would be?
Well, they can spread
they
could spread positivity for sure, right? Like again, it's kind of like a force multiplier, and I think the problem with like the benefit of being able to watch somebody playing your game on stream, as Candace did, as Kevin wishes he could have, is immense. And so I just kind of want to keep refining my like influencers are bad for game dev take into something that is more like it becomes a problem when it's an influencer versus somebody playing the game with a developer watching. An influencer is like someone trying to necessarily keep their platform up. And I think the temptation of developers to use influencers and players playing the game for exposure instead of collecting feedback is kind of where things start to distort. You don't bring people necessarily into a focus test because you're hoping they're going to advocate for you. You're trying to get notes, but I mean, positive communities can spread too.
Yeah, and you're trying to see how the player actually engages with the game as opposed to how you think they would engage with it.
Yeah, that's true too.
All
Sorry,
right.
Kevin, what were you saying about positive communities? Because you have a really, really warm one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I'm curious because I've only been on Twitch for a short time. But like for people that watched Asmongold when he was, first starting to blow up, I like to imagine a time where he was generally more positive in like from a percentage standpoint. He spent more time being positive and less time negative, and that has shifted a little bit potentially. Or was he always sort of like, disgruntled, right? Like,
I used to watch a ton of them in 2016. It was like kind of a little more of like degenerate because it just could have been, but I don't think it was more negative. And also Legion was so exciting that I remember him being really hyped. Like he was just jamming Maw Souls plus 10s nonstop every day, and he seemed pretty into it because, we all were. So it's tough to say like has he shifted? Because it was also a different time and place,
Yeah.
with
So
the game.
that was the other thing I was going to say is it could also be just sort of the finger on the pulse of the community and how it's feeling. And there are good moments and there are bad moments, and developers can take note of, which way it's going. And, that can be useful information, not to cause people to panic or get upset about the way things are going or depressed about the work they're doing. But yeah, it can also just be a metric for the emotional responses to things, which, if used appropriately by the developers, can again, like, hopefully influence the way they think about things. Not necessarily one-to-one. There has to be that translation again, but yeah, it can be very useful.
For what it's worth, my opinion of Asmongold was, and sorry for like simping Asmongold, but I feel like he
Oh,
always gives very
please.
thoughtful feedback, and I think after as many years as maybe I've had listening to people say like she should be fired, give this guy the promotion, but then fire that guy, and I was
Right.
both of those guys, like in the thread, like fire the guy that did this boss, and then whatever. I've kind of
They only
learned.
wanted to fire you? My God, they were asking for me to die in a fire while being hit by a bus.
Right,
They've gotten so nice
answer
these
combo.
days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
They're
I've
so
had that.
nice nowadays.
But so I learned to kind of tune out the emotional aspect of feedback sometimes, and so I think like obviously the worst feedback you can hear as a designer is your game sucks for two reasons. One, it's negative and it hurts,
Mhm.
and two, it's not descriptive. I don't know why does it suck. I
It's
have to
also,
follow
it's
that up with a
useless. It's
question.
the
Like
big problem.
but then I also learned to tune out that your game's amazing. The boss fight was fucking amazing. It's the best one I've ever fought. And I'm just like, cool, thanks. Why? Like I want to know. And so what I love about Asmongold is that even though he'll have a feeling that he has, it's either positive or negative, or he's hyped or he's mad, he'll always go into why, which I always find that way more useful
Yep. Agree.
than just like hype beast or pain train.
Yeah, I mean, both him and Bellular, I always thought could be designers. Really, they had like really good, thoughtful takes on a lot of things, and you could tell they think deeply about an issue or subject. And I think the other thing too is when I was, I forgot, I think maybe it was on your Discord, Kevin. Someone was talking about how yeah, it feels like Bellular is just always dogging on the game or whatever, but I think, and I mentioned like on aggregate, really Bellular and probably Asmongold, most of their feedback or most of their sentiment of the game usually on stream and stuff is positive. But
Absolutely.
everyone will focus on a negative, even if
Yeah.
it's like 3% or whatever.
Well, that's why
Right,
the Bellular thing got so much play, because of the shift. Like he's
Right.
never been like that. So that was such a shock to everyone's system that
Just
Bellular
mask
went
off.
uncaged, right?
Yeah, unleashed.
But
exactly.
I think part of why they are so reflective in their feedback too is because they have a genuine love for the game, as opposed to other influencers that tend to just be playing the game to get the views, etc.
But I mean, I think the key with influencers, and always the most popular ones, I think why Asmongold is really popular. Yes, he has this whole persona that people will think is funny, but I think really a big part of it is he's authentic. He says
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
he thinks. He says what he really feels about the game, whether it's good or bad. And people in this era, they're really attracted to authenticity. And I think it could be challenging for the influencers, especially when they're unhappy with the game, but they need to be upbeat on their stream, because if they aren't, people aren't going to tune out from them. In the short term, being kind of bombastic or a drama queen or whatever on your video or stream or whatever can get attention. But if you do it too long, people will start to go away, because, really ultimately the people watching them are fans of the game and they want to hear about
Yes.
they don't want to hear, negative things all day,
Yeah.
True.
There was this dude in BFA that, I don't remember his name, and don't go hunting for him, but he made these review videos and they were just flatly negative every single time. And it was like the fucking TMZ of like World of Warcraft news, And I could not tune in to this guy after like 2 or 3 sessions, even though I agreed with a bunch of his points, because after a while it was clear that he was just trying to be negative to keep the engines stoked. And I don't feel like Asmongold is overall, negative. I feel like he's generally like a really positive person, but the stuff that ends up tracking and gets visible, and this is why I was saying like sometimes influencers can be problematic, is like all it takes are 1 or 2 unleashed videos, or like some twit longer to really go wild. And most of the time, I don't feel like the WoW devs are going to be sitting there being like, oh, 90% of his content this month was just him chilling with the boys and like doing transmog contests and mount offs. And that must mean he was having fun. Like they might not even put eyes on that at all. And then all it takes is like within this sphere, one tiny piece of bad shit to go viral to like enter the discussion in a major way,
Well, we brought up 2 other people to the stage too. Let's get them a
All right.
chance to speak.
First of all, I got to get going, and it was nice chatting with you all. It was good asking questions, and I'll catch y'all later. I'll give both of you
Thanks,
the
Glaive.
stage here.
Thanks,
No
Thanks,
problem,
Glaive.
Glaive. Thanks.
So, good morning or good evening, whatever it is.
Hello.
Loving the show so far, by the way. Appreciate the opportunity that you're doing this on Discord. It's really amazing. To kind of add on the whole Asmongold situation, especially judging by what's been going on in the last week or 2, something that he brought up in his tweet longer, I think, but kind of that's something that I think Sloopback was during his interview with Morgan Day, that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the what the devs are doing or planning and the intentions in general and what the community wants, and that there's a little bit of it's a bit of a problem because the community has wishes and plans and their thoughts that often are very much fueled by these big influences because they say, oh, the game would be so much better if X, Y, Z would be changed. And that might be completely against what the developers are planning, but and probably for fair reasons, because another problem I think is that 90% of the silent audience, the silent player base, is not really encompassed with all the thoughts and takes of the big influences, because they're just high level oriented, high level PvE, high level PvP. So that kind of falls under the table. Sorry if I'm rambling a little bit. So
That's all right.
basically what I'm saying, kind of the disconnect between dev intentions and thoughts and the wishes the community has, and especially fueled by influences. That whole process, I think, is a little bit more extreme recently. Do you guys think that's somewhat accurate, or
Yes.
is that something that
Yeah.
should be addressed and can be addressed at all?
I don't know if it can be, but it has to be addressed by each individual developer. But yeah, one of the common argument strategies is this should be changed because everyone feels like I do, right? So it's something you see all the time. And then influencers then kind of collect that and make it even worse, right? It's influencer said, and he has a bunch of followers, therefore it's true that everyone believes this thing. So, but developers, if they're doing good and right by the game, know how to translate that and understand it's not really everyone who feels that way. And it's their job to look out for all the different, groups that aren't getting to weigh in.
Yeah, I think I wanted to mention, because I read that twit longer that you're talking about, and he had said something along the lines of like, well, the devs are either are ignorant, not like stupid. Like stupid would be an insult. Ignorant is just a fact. Like you either know the facts or you don't, and that makes you ignorant. Or they're like tone deaf. They're like willfully ignoring us, or they're accidentally ignoring us, and that basically both of those answers are unacceptable to the community. Is but how I'd summarize what he said. And what is interesting about that as a developer is like obviously nobody goes into the office and pours work into something for a couple months and says, I can't wait until people fucking hate this. Like I'm gonna ruin their fucking day with this. Like you don't I mean maybe sometimes you make that mythic boss and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna ruin their fucking day. But like you don't actively try to make people hate your game whenever you make it.
Explain days then, explain that.
But what another thing that is kind of challenging to the flow of information between the community and the developers is that like the community will overwhelmingly say we want this thing, and then the numbers behind it, like if you look at what people are actually doing, they sometimes portray a very different message of what the players want. And so it's really hard to reconcile that, like whenever like emotionally it's really easy whenever you're, especially when you're in, like when I was a hardcore raider and there was like the 10 versus 25 man debate, and I was the only person, it felt like I was the only person on one of the sides of the debate, and it was very emotionally important to me, but then also like the numbers just didn't line up with my emotions, you know what I'm saying?
If I may interject there right away, that's something that bothers me personally as a player a little bit, that all these performance metrics, I'll just call them, all the data behind all the dev decisions, as you just mentioned, the 1025 rate decision making, all that stuff. All that this data, of course, it's important. It's very important for the devs, and they make great use of it. But it's completely unknown to the player base, and I don't think there is really a way for the community to kind of get their hands on outside of some third-party tracking sites. Let's say Raid.io for high-end plus statistics, if we're just talking about World of Warcraft. But in general, it's just it feels so. It's basically a black box for the player base, and I'm kind of thinking that it might be a little bit better if some of that data, or a good chunk of that data, was available to public. But since I'm not in games personally, I don't know if that's on a business side like completely no go that you open up your player data to the community.
Well,
I mean,
I want to just defend what I said really quick though, and I wasn't saying that you're wrong because the numbers tell you you're wrong. I'm saying that there is that it's really hard to make an informed decision when you don't know which data to go with. If that makes any sense. It doesn't mean that the community is wrong just because, I don't know, if everyone's saying I want chocolate ice cream, but your vanilla sales are through the fucking roof, right? Like, well, what if we don't have time to make both vanilla and chocolate ice cream? You know, that kind of stuff. But I wasn't saying that you should ignore those people, or that they're wrong, or that wouldn't be a huge opportunity to start selling chocolate ice cream. Like, what happens if now suddenly you start selling chocolate ice cream and your revenue triples because now you've invited people who don't just eat vanilla ice cream? You know, like, so I just want to say, like, it's not as simple as looking at the numbers, and it's not as simple as listening to the community. But what you can do as a developer is make the conversation easier to have between you and your community, so that you can solicit the kind of feedback from the people who would have wanted chocolate but didn't post that on the internet, right? So having like having many avenues that you can discuss things with your players, and having surveys, and having just get more information than you need, reach out to the player and have a meaningful connection with them in every language, in every region. I feel like that's the actual answer, is that your numbers are wrong, so you can't rely on your numbers, but you can try to make your numbers right.
I mean, I think that one of the biggest problems with Blizzard and the community right now is just the community doesn't understand what the vision of what the developers are doing. Right? There's a disconnect there. It's like, what are we trying to do here? The developers have one idea, and the players are trying to interpret that. And the players, if they're not told of what's really the vision, what we're trying to do on the project, they make up their own story of what it's supposed to be. And usually they make up that story based on historically what it's been, right? And sometimes the vision shifts and no one gets a memo. No one says like, hey, we're now trying to do this instead of what we used to do. Now we're trying to do like, part of the goal of the game now is to do a big system each patch or something. Well, we didn't get the memo there. Like, no one told us that, right? And that's your job, really, is the leadership of the team, is to constantly tell the players what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, what the vision, the idea of the game is supposed to be. And when you don't do that well, there's a disconnect, and players are just like left out. Like, what are we trying to do? Like, what are you trying to do here? You know?
Yeah, and the players, when they're left to their own devices, will assume, again, like Candace said, and the Twitlonger said, it's either malice or incompetence. Those are the only two answers that the community can typically come up with.
Yeah, and as we've discussed before too, is that really ultimately in the best interest of the player is not that the developers necessarily listening to the player. You don't want them to just do everything the player says, because really the game is an art, and it's being made by the developers. You want them to be able to have, freedom and agency to do what they feel is best. you know.
Mhm.
And so, but what you want to have is just being able to understand what they're trying to do and what their goals are. I think that's really it. And it sounds easy. It sounds just like, oh, you just tell them what you're trying to do. But it's something you constantly have to keep repeating yourself and doing all
Mhm.
the time, right?
And it's very complex. Yeah, as Candace spoke so well too, as well. Like the process is so difficult of getting developers and players on the same page. Because you mentioned, Lightly, that like give us the data so we know what you're basing your decisions on. But the
Mhm.
data is really complicated to actually use for a developer, and it can be even more complicated for a player to be able to use effectively. So there's so many ways to interpret data that if the data were provided, a lot of times people would just use it to prove whatever point they were trying to prove.
Yeah.
Like
that
80%
presumes
of
that
people hate chocolate,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, that's not true. They just prefer vanilla to chocolate. They don't hate chocolate. So, it's like, again, giving them sometimes access to information doesn't always work out because they end up just weaponizing it against,
yeah.
common sense.
If they're
That's
not
a
willing
great
to have their
point.
minds changed, it won't really matter either
Mhm.
way. I mean, I could see the data, and if I'm feeling like, well, I'm still not having fun, then I don't really care about the data because the net result is
Yeah.
that, like, if you're using the data to drive you, it's wrong because I'm not having fun, so there. And likewise, developers could dig in their heels about the sort of lightning rod of community sentiment that accumulates behind an influencer that makes it over to their desk. They could just feel like, well, this like aggregate kind of mad consensus about this one thing is wrong because I'm the vision keeper and I have things they don't know. Like people have to be good faith actors and willing to have their mind changed before transparency can like meaningfully do anything. Just putting it all out there in the open is not going to necessarily fix stuff. And Blizzard's
yeah,
never going to do that.
Good question, though.
Yep.
Want to give Red Dawn also a chance to.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt with my question.
No, go ahead.
Discussion was good, but I wanted to kind of like build off that. So when you see this data, or perhaps the game dev has a vision that will build into a few patches, how exactly would you go about when someone like Asmongold that has an incredibly powerful influence that can quite literally change the public opinion? So, for example, with his tweet longer, in live chats, the narrative went to maybe some game devs, like it was one or the other, and then someone like Limit Maximum, who has a smaller I guess influence, was kind of pushing back on that idea. But even his chat was then arguing with him and just
Mhm.
taking Asmongold's stance, and it almost puts the devs in like a impossible position, because you're either going to do something that goes against the public opinion and then get raged at more, or you just give in to what they want, and maybe that wasn't even the right choice to begin with, and now they're still mad. So like, how do you even deal with these situations where influencers have so much power on public opinion and I guess public desire for games?
Well,
Kevin,
I mean,
oh, sorry.
you at least try to cure your ignorance, right? Like if it's either ignorance or malice, or sometimes it's just not malice. It's just there are impossible factors like time or the impact on the overall game or like whatever. But what you can do is listen, and you can attempt to cure your ignorance. And even sometimes when you can't make the call that the community wants for various reasons that you may or may not be able to like expose publicly, you can make the community feel heard and give a thoughtful response.
And there's sometimes too where it's not as simple as it's malice or it's ignorance. A lot of times they had an idea that they thought was cool. People thought it was cool. They tried it, didn't work, and that's it. There's no sort of
Mhm.
hidden conspiracy or thing they're trying to do. It was just honestly making games is, I hate to say this because people say it stupidly sometimes, but making games really is hard. And
Mhm.
WoW is one of the hardest games to make and has a really vocal and, passionate player base. And so
Yep.
not everything you're going to do is going to be a home run, right? Like I've made many spells that I deleted the next expansion. I was like, whoops, didn't know what that was a bad one, whatever it is, right? And so,
Yeah, and I think what you spoke about earlier, just the vision, you have to go back to the vision. You test these ideas against the vision. Are you living up to the vision? Have you moved away from it? And so the absence of vision, especially amongst the team, but also again conveying it to the community, can help a lot with this. So like a lot of it's target hitting. Like you come up with targets, And if you hit your targets based on the vision, then this is what we set out to accomplish. Now players don't like it, and we take that on board for the next phase, whether that's a modification of the vision or we press on and try to polish it as much as possible. But having that vision to bounce it off is really important. And it also just conveys, it puts it on the player base to accept or not, right? And sometimes that is actually good in terms of like let's just say people complaining about the drop rates of legendaries or whatever it is. You can say, well, we want 0.5% of the player base to have a legendary. And so if it's at 0.5% and everyone's complaining, well, you can just tell them, well, we've hit our targets. So this is our intent. And then maybe some explaining of why we want legendaries to be that rare. And then it's kind of up to each individual player to say, well, that sucks, but I understand, or I agree with, the principle and I'm sad that I can't have it, that kind of thing. But where you get into trouble is people don't understand what you're trying to achieve. And then they start guessing because you haven't communicated your vision. So
I guess.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go.
Well, I was just thinking this whole conversation about the effect of influencers on game development, just to make sure that this isn't just like some giant phantom, argument or scenario that's happened here, Can any of you attest to a situation where actually something happened because of an influencer and you decided we need to make this change from a development perspective? And I mean, not necessarily because you just watched somebody playing the game, which you could have approximated with a focus test back in the day, but there is a surge of popular opinion behind a personality and you're doing something different with the game. Because I've never had that actually happen to me. And I'm kind of curious, this has happened, right? Can anyone point to it? You want to drop any nuggets?
I'm trying to think of some good examples, but I mean, there are many, many examples. I mean, it would happen probably every week, almost probably. I would see, for example, the Shadow Priest revamp that I did before I left the WoW team. I would keep refreshing YouTube for new videos on Shadow Priest to see, what they're saying about it. And there's a lot of really great feedback of this talent's not hitting the mark, or this one is just whatever, or this thing's too overpowered. Or I watched people play through a dungeon and everybody was using the same talents. And I was like, oh, those are probably broken, right? And so I changed those. And so I mean, that's kind of how I used to design things, is basically just implement it, wait for a patch, watch people's reaction, watch them play it, and change things, and then rinse and repeat. And really, I mean, a lot of Candace could probably speak to encounter design works the same way. And really internally with QA and UX, you kind of do the same thing, right?
I would love to be a little bit pedantic about something Luca said, though. Whereas, yes, it's
Please.
very true that the smart thing to do is to listen to your community, find the good bits and the sound arguments that appeal to both logic and the vision of the game, and then make thoughtful changes based on that. But I think what Luca had said was specific to influencers, and because they had such a megaphone, right? Because they had such a loud voice and
Right.
and a far reach. Did you
Yep.
do anything disproportionate for them? Which is, I would say, anybody who gives a sound argument that changes my mind is treated equally, though that's also unfair to say because the influencers get more uptime, they have that megaphone. But I don't think it's because of the megaphone that we would make any sweeping change. It's not like, well, so and so is going to
Right. Oh, that's a good point.
host a 10,000 person gnome rush if we don't do this thing. Let's respond to the terrorist attack. I can't point to one of those kind of decisions, if that makes any sense.
I mean, all these
confirmed terrorists.
That's a good point, Cass. It's to be clear, it's we don't make. I don't think. I mean,
You don't give it to
demands.
demands.
Well, no, I don't think anyone really made decisions based off. Let me see how many followers I have, and then maybe I'll do it or something. It's more of just really what a good designer does is they grab all this data, and the data comes from different people, different influencers, whoever it is, players, forums, your mom, whoever it is. And then you kind of ruminate and think about those things, and then make a decision yourself, right? It's not about trying to create a poll and see what hits the highest, polls the best, and then change that. That's not how you want to design anything, right? But yeah, that's a good point to say, Candace. I wanted to give Nano also a chance to take the stage and ask a question or a comment or something.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for pulling me up. I have like a few thoughts, and I'll try to like synthesize them really quickly. There was one thing that in Preach's interview with Ian that threw me for a loop a little bit. Preach asked a question about scaling, the gearing scaling, and basically the idea was that he felt that the scaling was out of whack compared to how it had been previously, and I felt the same way. That was actually one of my biggest issues with Shadowlands, especially in the PvP realm, is that it just felt like the lack of gear was more apparent than it ever had been before, especially in PvP because the like template stuff had been taken away. But Ian's answer was it actually hasn't changed since Wrath, and I couldn't quite square the facts of what he was saying, which I believe, and my feeling in playing the game, because I felt the scaling being very off, and it was off-putting to me compared to what the actual facts of it are.
Oh, pick
So-
me, pick me.
Yeah, you can jump on that. So yeah.
I think that both of you can be correct, factually accurate at the same time. I believe that the gear level scaling can be unchanged, while yet there is a band of item level that can be disproportionately powerful or unexpectedly powerful, especially given a covenant ability that basically negates all of your cooldowns or is maybe new to the expansion. And so I think that I think it's two parts. One, someone blames the item level scaling when maybe something else is wrong. And two, someone says, no, the item scaling is perfect. And both of those people are correct.
Yeah. And I think that some of it, there's like benchmarks too, right? Especially with secondary stats where like you can hit a certain level of haste that like allows you to start doing more things that you otherwise couldn't. And you just like the 13 item levels was the big difference there. Or, Divine Toll is just super good. And when it procs, you just instantly die. That happens too.
And that's just a great example of like this is curing your ignorance as a developer, right? You hear something, but instead of maybe hearing the essence of what someone said, you take it at face value when they're saying it's the gear. And yeah, I mean maybe it's the gear, but maybe there's also something else. And so actually Ian's response is really smart. He goes, the gear is unchanged, but if there's something I would like to know. And so, and he said he was going to check up on it from what I recall. So not to like simp Ian or anything, but I think that it was construed as he dismissed us by saying that gear is fine, when really he said it's not the gear, and then like maybe in parentheses said, is it something else?
Yeah, you can simp Ian. I'm okay. I actually am one of the rare people, and apparently in the WoW community, that actually likes Ian. At least what I know about him. But the other thing I was going to say is, there's been a big push in the PvP community for solo queue. That they feel that solo queue solves a lot of the problems in the PvP realm with, looking for group not being useful and can't find games and like the lower participation, which I don't even know if it's true or not. And I've always felt like that's wrong. And would make it worse. But I don't speak out about that because it's such a popular opinion that I don't want to be on the opposite end of the zeitgeist, essentially. And so like I can get the idea of like, okay, I'm not going to do the popular thing that everybody wants to do because I think it's bad. But how do you get to the place where you're like convinced that it's actually on the other side and the people are right?
Sorry, to be clear, your stance is that you think
I would
solo
be
queue
against
wouldn't
solo.
help, or
I would be
okay.
against solo queue in part because I think it's another example of the game being pushed away from group content, which I think is the core value proposition of WoW.
Right. I mean, yeah, solo queue is something we've talked about, I think, a couple times on the show, right, guys? And the thing is, my view on it is just that I am skeptical of that solo queue would be, a net positive. Just because there's a lot of challenges when you do solo queue, which is just that you're putting players together who don't know each other, and WoW has a lot of, the meta is really important. Like what comp you have is very important, and so does the matchmaker now need to understand what optimal good comps are. Like if you get matched with, if you're, a caster cleave or something matched with, or sorry, you're matched against a caster cleave and you have like two warriors and, a priest or something, you're gonna be like, what the hell is going on with this matchmaker, right? Like those making a matchmaker already, even when there is no classes, when it's just about skill, is challenging in itself. and now you're adding this whole dynamic of compositions and all of that. And so I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done or couldn't be positive, but I'm skeptical that they'd be able to implement it in such a way that there wouldn't be a lot of drama and distaste for the implementation. And I think ultimately, what you talk about in terms of group content, I notice a lot of players that are very they sort of think that the LFR and group finder and stuff has negatively impacted the community effect of the game in
Mhm.
terms of like, I play with my guild or I try to create communities, or it's all about creating relationships to form groups and stuff like that. And so certainly the more kind of click a button, I get matched into a group sort of systems you add into the game, make creating that kind of community feel in an MMO in a virtual world more challenging. And so that's kind of what I would say about that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of where I'm at with it.
bouncing it off my old school, sensibilities. I think a lot of people want to join solo queue because they want easier access to the gear that comes out of arena, and bypassing the social, element of it. That's sort of a requirement now. Like you have to find a partner. And I would say it's more important in this case that the social design leads people to wanting to form groups and, putting in the work to be social and in order to get, access to that gear. Now, obviously, retail has gone a different direction for many years in that sense, with Dungeon Finder and LFR and all those things. But I don't think, another system that promotes, antisocial or solo play is, the right direction.
Mhm.
It's also not even just about the detraction of the high level goal of an MMO, right? Which is to bring people together and give them content to do together, and have those memorable stories that you tell about the games that you play. But it's also, would a solo queue experience be an experience that WoW would want to put their name on, or would they need to improve on the experience? And
Mhm.
what trade-offs would they have to make solo queue into something that was a world-class AAA experience? And would that be at the cost of the people who choose to do it with a community? For example, if the easiest way to get the gear is to just log in solo queue, grit your teeth and bear it because you hate it, but that's easier than waiting for your best friend to log on.
Mhm.
Maybe now those two best friends don't get to play together anymore.
That's
And
right.
and again, I keep making like the social problem, but like it's also just about, would the solo queue experience be palatable and good, and if not, then what would it take? And so if they wanted to have, if people want to have a conversation about that, that would be really constructive, I think, of like, what is the ultimate solo queue experience, and what do we think the ramifications of that would be on the game?
Yeah, well
All right.
said.
I don't want to monopolize time. I want to ask one more question real quick. It's not a quick question, but is the scope of WoW too big now? And I'll give an example with 9.1 here. Is that it seems every piece of the content except for maybe the mega dungeon of 9.1 is wrapped around the story of where we're going in the Shadowlands. And it seems like, from my perspective, that having it all wrapped up in the story does somewhat limit the ability for you to put out new content. So maybe like a mini raid or extra dungeons or something like that. So in general, like, is the scope of WoW too big to produce content on a regular, more consistent, faster basis these days?
Yep, good question.
Yeah, I don't know. You're saying is
I mean,
the expectation of story content the bottleneck for other things that might otherwise be done?
That's my perception, is that all the
Uh-huh.
content is wrapped up in telling the story. Like the raid is the story, because I mean
Mhm.
we're going to kill Sylvanas, right? Or do something with Sylvanas. Like you can't release the raid without having the rest of the story going along with it. And so is that whole process kind of hampering the ability to get content out?
Yeah, I mean, you're touching on one of my sore spots too. It's just like, well, I mean, my view is just that the story at MMO, like WoW, should be focusing on primarily is the player's story, and try to downplay. I mean, it's okay if there is a story in terms of characters in the game or some world events and things going on. That's all great, but that should kind of take a backseat in terms of what the player's story is, right? And you're right, definitely, that the bigger and more important and more serious the story gets, the more kind of it starts to say, well, you can't add that feature or that idea or that thing because it doesn't work with the story. You know, you don't want to get yourself in that situation, because then it really hampers the creativity of the team, and they can't really do whatever they want to do. If it made sense for the player, it made sense for just the game. Blizzard's value is gameplay first for a reason, not, you know, narrative first, right? And so, and there are other studios that are narrative first, and that's fine. Like, for example, The Last of Us, the Naughty Dog, right? They have a lot of games where if you go work at that studio, everything has to do about, okay, what is the character? What are they thinking? What are they doing? It all wraps around the narrative of the characters in the game, right? And so that's fine for games like that. But is that really supposed to be what WoW's about? You know, maybe it is. Maybe that's what the game is more about these days, right? And again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the vision. Like, tell us, this is what the game's about. That's okay, but just tell us, right?
Yeah, another part of it is just you know, nowadays we have 5 different avenues for collecting gear or whatever it is, and they're all competitive in some way, or, you know, interrelated. So people feel like they have to go to all these different things to do all the things. So in sense of like scope throughout the story for a minute, and it's like, okay, we have this raid ready. It's like a little raid, but it's going to bump your item level. How are you guys going to feel if we do the raid and then a few months later we do the other 4 things where you can get comparable gear, which is a sort of horizontal versus vertical progression? How do you think that would go down with the community? Would they be like, oh, this is lame? They, you know, they put out 4 more things, but nobody wants to go there because our gear is already maxed from this other thing we've been grinding? Or do you think they'd be like, oh, sweet, just random more fun things to do, and we're not getting any new gear, but that's fine because they're fun to play? So it's a tough way to, now they've got this system where they kind of have to package, or at least in their minds, they feel like they might have to package all 5 of these things at once, which is a much tougher thing to do.
What Kevin said is absolutely true. And what I also wanted to add to that was that there's this thought that is prevalent that is not actually the reality of game development, which is like, you made this thing and that cost us this. Like, you made this scenario and it cost us a raid tier or something like that. And whereas largely, especially with story-based content, that is just wildly untrue, because there is a team that is dedicated to telling the story. There is a team that is dedicated to making the raid content, and there's very little overlap. There's maybe some art overlap. One of the things I would like to shine a spotlight on, though, is the fidelity of the game creeping up over and over the course of the last 10 years, right? Everything is now, the whole storyline is expected to be VO'd. There's cutscenes, there's in-game rendering cinematics, and those things take so long that you have to plan them months, if not years in advance to get them done. And so once you have that scope, you lose all of that flexibility to add and tell all the stories that you want to tell, because now you have to express it in a very pipeline heavy way that eventually you just run out of time, because casting and directing and recording VO takes fucking time,
Yeah, it
right?
does.
And
It's a big
so
one.
I just wanted to challenge the notion that, like, that one thing necessarily costs from another thing, when really maybe some of the things to look for is like, how has the complexity of the game scaled over time? What do the players expect now? They expect VO from their main characters. They love to hear Solanas' voice. They love to hear the brand new character, and, you know, guide them through the first zone of the expansion. And on top of that, there will be a new feature that they try to add, like artifacts or whatever, that will take like a significant chunk of just time to develop, and not necessarily resources from one department or another.
I think that really perfectly wraps it back to the core Nano's question. And I think we're going to actually call it here, folks. It's been an hour and a half. So thanks for hanging with us for our first time on Discord Stages. I hope it was a bump-free ride. We'll be back here next week, doing it again at 6. And but hang out, chat in the channels, ask us questions anytime you want. You know, we never go offline. So we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.